The wind howled across the barren plains of EO7, carrying with it the faint scent of metallic dust. Kale Armitage tightened their coat around them as they trudged through the darkness. The colony's perimeter lights were barely visible now, small pinpricks in the distance that did little to chase away the oppressive gloom. It wasn't supposed to be this way. A routine maintenance check on the solar arrays had turned into something far more unsettling when one of the panels went offline without explanation. Kale didn't like being out here alone. No one did. The planet was vast and unforgiving, its surface scarred by jagged rocks and endless stretches of gray soil. But tonight felt different, wrong somehow. Every step seemed heavier than the last, as though the ground itself was trying to hold them back. Their breath fogged in the cold air, and the silence pressed against their ears like a weight. Then came the whisper. At first, Kale thought it was just the wind playing tricks on them. But no, it was too clear, too deliberate. They froze mid-step, heart pounding as they scanned the shadows around them. "Who's there?" Kale called out, voice cracking slightly despite their best effort to sound confident. A figure emerged from the darkness, so silently that Kale almost missed her entirely. She was tall, taller than any human, with skin that shimmered faintly under the dim starlight. Her eyes glowed softly, an otherworldly blue that pierced through the night. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she spoke again, her voice low and melodic, yet laced with urgency. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her words barely audible over the wind. Kale took a cautious step backward, hands instinctively reaching for the utility belt strapped to their waist. There was nothing useful there, a flashlight, a multi-tool, and a communicator that probably wouldn't work out here anyway. Still, it gave them some semblance of control. "What do you mean?" Kale asked, forcing their voice to stay steady. "Who are you?" She tilted her head, studying Kale with an intensity that made their skin crawl. Her gaze wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It was curious, like she was trying to decide whether Kale posed a threat or not. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke again. "This place is not safe for your kind." "Not safe," Kale echoed, frustration creeping into their tone. "We've been living here for years. If there's something dangerous, why haven't we seen it before now?" The alien woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the distant colony lights, her expression unreadable. When she looked back at Kale, there was something almost sad in her glowing eyes. "You see only what you wish to see," she murmured cryptically. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she stepped back into the shadows and vanished. For several long moments, Kale stood rooted to the spot, staring at the empty space where she had been. Their mind raced with questions. Who, or what, was she? What did she mean by your kind? And most importantly, why had she chosen to warn them specifically? The wind picked up again, colder this time, snapping Kale out of their thoughts. Shaking their head, they turned and began walking briskly back toward the colony. Whatever secrets this planet held, Kale knew one thing for certain. They weren't going to find answers standing out here in the dark. But as they walked, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Somewhere in the vast emptiness behind them, unseen eyes lingered, waiting. Waiting for what Kale didn't know. But deep down, they feared they were about to find out. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't ready for the truth. Back at the colony, Kale hurried through the narrow corridors of the settlement's main hub. The metallic walls hummed faintly with the sound of machinery, a constant reminder of how fragile their existence was on this alien world. EU7 wasn't built for humans. It fought them every step of the way. The air outside was barely breathable without filters. The soil refused to grow crops, and the planet's erratic weather patterns made even simple tasks feel like battles. Kale entered the communal dining hall, where settlers gathered in small clusters, sharing meals and conversations that often veered toward complaints. Some laughed nervously. Others argued loudly about resource shortages or equipment failures. It was chaos disguised as normalcy. Kale grabbed a tray of bland nutrient paste, a poor substitute for real food, and found an empty corner to sit. They weren't hungry, but eating gave them something to do while they tried to process what had happened out there. Their mind kept drifting back to the alien woman, her glowing eyes, her cryptic warning. "You shouldn't be here." What did she mean? Was she talking about Kale personally, or humanity as a whole? And why had she disappeared so quickly? None of it made sense. "Hey, you okay?" A voice interrupted their thoughts. Kale looked up to see Mira Solis, one of the colony's engineers, sliding into the seat across from them. Mira had sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude that made her both respected and slightly intimidating. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Kale hesitated. Part of them wanted to tell Mira everything. The strange encounter, the eerie feeling of being watched, but another part warned against it. People here were already on edge. Mentioning aliens would only stir up panic. "Just tired," Kale lied, forcing a weak smile. "Long day fixing those solar arrays." Mira raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "Yeah, well, we're all tired. Things are falling apart faster than we can fix them. Did you hear about the water filtration system? Broke down again last night. We're rationing until someone figures it out." Kale nodded absently. Problems like these were nothing new. Since arriving on EO7 5 years ago, the colony had faced one crisis after another. Supplies dwindled, morale plummeted, and tensions ran high. Everyone blamed someone else: corporate overlords who sent them here unprepared, scientists who promised the planet was habitable, leaders who couldn't keep order. But tonight, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was lurking beneath the surface, something they didn't understand yet. Later, unable to sleep, Kale wandered to the observation deck, a glass-domed room overlooking the desolate landscape outside. Stars glittered coldly in the black sky, and the horizon stretched endlessly in every direction. This place felt wrong, not just because it was harsh, but because it seemed alive, like it was watching them, waiting for something. As Kale stared out at the emptiness, their thoughts turned to the ruins Dr. Leora Vance had mentioned during orientation months ago. Ancient structures buried deep underground, remnants of a civilization long gone. Could the alien woman have been connected to them? If so, what secrets might those ruins hold? Before Kale could dwell too long on the idea, a sudden power flicker plunged the room into darkness. For a brief moment, panic surged through them. Then emergency lights kicked in, casting the space in a dim red glow. Settlers murmured anxiously nearby, speculating about sabotage or malfunction. Kale clenched their fists. Whatever was happening, it wasn't random. Something, or someone, was testing them. And Kale couldn't shake the feeling that the answers lay hidden in the shadows, just beyond reach. The next morning, Kale woke with a sense of purpose they hadn't felt in months. Sleep had been fleeting, their mind replaying fragments of the alien woman's warning and the unsettling flicker of lights in the observation deck. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and Kale couldn't ignore it any longer. They decided to investigate the old tunnels near the colony's edge, places most settlers avoided due to rumors of instability and strange occurrences. After grabbing a flashlight and a small toolkit, Kale slipped out of the main hub without drawing attention. The tunnels were part of an abandoned excavation project from years ago, when scientists first discovered hints of ancient structures buried beneath EO7's surface. Back then, corporate overseers had ordered the work halted, citing safety concerns, but whispers persisted about what lay hidden down there. Kale didn't know if they'd find anything useful, but it was better than sitting around waiting for answers that never came. The entrance to the tunnels was marked by rusted metal barriers, half buried in dirt. Kale pushed past them, stepping into the cool, damp air inside. The walls were rough-hewn rock, carved by machines long since decommissioned. As they ventured deeper, the silence grew heavier, broken only by the occasional drip of water echoing through the narrow passages. It wasn't long before Kale noticed something unusual. Faint etchings covered parts of the walls, symbols unlike anything they'd seen before. They glowed softly, pulsing with a dim light that seemed almost alive. Kale ran their fingers over one of the markings, feeling a strange warmth radiate from it. It sent a shiver down their spine. Whoever, or whatever, had created these symbols clearly possessed knowledge far beyond human understanding. Further along, Kale found evidence of recent activity: footprints in the dust, scuff marks on the ground, and even a discarded piece of fabric snagged on a jagged rock. Someone, or something, had been here recently. Their heart raced as they realized they might not be alone. Suddenly, a soft sound behind them made Kale freeze. Turning slowly, they scanned the shadows, their flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. At first, nothing moved. Then, just as they started to relax, the alien woman appeared again, stepping silently into view. Her glowing eyes locked onto Kale's, unreadable yet intense. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the dripping water. Kale swallowed hard, trying to steady their breathing. "Why not?" they asked, gripping the flashlight tightly. "What are you hiding?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gestured toward the glowing symbols on the wall. "This is not yours to take," she said finally, her tone carrying both warning and sorrow. "Your kind does not understand what it seeks." Before Kale could respond, she turned and disappeared into the shadows once more, leaving them standing alone in the eerie glow of the ancient carvings. For a moment, all Kale could do was stare at the spot where she had vanished. Then, determination set in. Whatever secrets this place held, Kale knew they had to uncover them, even if it meant risking everything. As they pressed onward, the tunnel seemed to grow darker, colder. But Kale couldn't turn back now, not when the truth was so close. Kale returned to the colony later that day, their mind racing with questions. The alien woman's words echoed in their head. "This is not yours to take." What had she meant? And why did she seem so determined to keep Kale away from the ruins? They needed answers, but they couldn't do it alone. There was only one person who might know something: Dr. Leora Vance, the colony's lead xenobiologist. Leora worked in a cramped lab tucked away in the corner of the settlement's research wing. Her workspace was cluttered with notes, samples, and holographic displays showing diagrams of alien flora and fauna. When Kale entered, she looked up from her work, surprised to see them. "Kale, what brings you here?" "I need to talk to you," Kale said, closing the door behind them. "About the ruins." Lyra's expression shifted instantly. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "The ruins? That's classified territory. Why are you asking about them?" Kale hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Finally, they decided to stick to the basics. "I went exploring near the old tunnels yesterday. I found things, symbols carved into the walls. They glowed like they were alive." "Do you know what they are?" Leora frowned, her sharp eyes narrowing as she studied Kale's face. "You shouldn't be poking around down there," she said firmly. "It's dangerous." "I'm not asking if I should or shouldn't," Kale replied, frustration creeping into their voice. "I'm asking what they are. You've been studying this planet longer than anyone else here. Don't tell me you don't know anything." For a long moment, Leora didn't speak. Then she sighed and gestured for Kale to sit. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "But this stays between us, understood?" Kale nodded eagerly, leaning forward as Leora began to explain. "Years ago, when we first arrived, our scans detected traces of an ancient civilization buried beneath the surface. We never fully explored it, corporate orders, but we did manage to gather some data. From what we could piece together, these aliens were incredibly advanced. Their technology wasn't just mechanical, it was integrated with their environment, almost like they became part of the planet itself." "And the symbols?" Kale pressed. "They're part of their language, or maybe more than that," Leora said. Some researchers believe the symbols weren't just communication tools. They might have been conduits for energy, ways to interact directly with the planet. But no one knows for sure. The project got shut down before we could learn more. Kale thought about the glowing carvings in the tunnels, the warmth they'd felt when touching them. Could the alien woman be connected to all this somehow? Was she trying to protect her people's legacy? There's something else, Leora added, lowering her voice. Rumors say the aliens destroyed themselves, pushed their tech too far, tapped into forces they couldn't control. If that's true, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Kale felt a chill run down their spine. If that's true, then we're making the same mistake. Leora didn't respond immediately. Instead, she picked up a small device from her desk, a fragment of alien material, and handed it to Kale. Be careful, she warned. Whatever you're looking for, it might not want to be found. As Kale left the lab, clutching the artifact tightly, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping onto a path with no turning back. But now, more than ever, they were determined to uncover the truth. Kale spent the rest of the day piecing together what they'd learned from Leora. The glowing symbols, the alien woman's warnings, the rumors of a self-destructive civilization, all of it pointed to one conclusion. Humanity was meddling with forces far beyond their understanding. But as Kale mulled over these thoughts, paranoia began to creep into the colony like an unwelcome shadow. It started subtly. A power outage in Sector B left half the settlers without heat for hours. Then, tools went missing from the maintenance bay, only to reappear days later in strange places. People whispered about sabotage, pointing fingers at each other. Some even blamed Kale, citing their frequent disappearances and secretive behavior. "Why are you always sneaking off?" someone asked accusingly during dinner. Kale brushed it off, but the tension was palpable. The breaking point came when Governor Elias Drake called an emergency meeting in the Central Hall. Drake was a tall, imposing man with a voice that demanded attention. He stood at the front of the room, flanked by armed guards, his expression grim. "Settlers," he began, "we have reason to believe there is a threat among us." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kale shifted uncomfortably in their seat, sensing where this was going. "Reports of unusual activity near the old tunnels have reached my ears." Drake continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Some of you may think exploring those areas is harmless curiosity. Let me assure you, it is not. We cannot afford distractions or risks while we work to secure our future here." Kale clenched their fists under the table. Drake wasn't just talking about exploration. He was issuing a warning. And then, without naming names, he added, "Anyone caught interfering with restricted zones will be dealt with severely." After the meeting, Mira approached Kale outside the hall. "You okay?" she asked quietly. That felt personal. It wasn't aimed at anyone specific, Kale lied, avoiding her eyes. They couldn't risk telling Mira, or anyone else, about the alien woman or the ruins. Not now, not with Drake watching so closely. But as the days passed, things grew worse. Surveillance drones buzzed overhead more frequently, and patrols roamed the colony's perimeter. Kale noticed strangers lingering near their quarters, people who hadn't been part of the original settlement crew. Were they spies? Or something worse? One night, unable to sleep, Kale slipped out of their quarters and headed toward the observation deck. They needed fresh air, space to think. As they stared out at the dark expanse of EO7, the alien woman appeared once again, stepping silently from the shadows. "You're running out of time," she said urgently, her glowing eyes locking onto Cal's. "They know you've been asking questions." "Who knows?" Kale demanded, heart pounding. "Drake, his guards." She shook her head. "Not just them. Others. Those who seek what you cannot comprehend." Before Kale could press further, she pressed something into their hand. A small, smooth stone etched with the same glowing symbols from the tunnels. "This will guide you," she whispered. "But trust no one. Not even your own kind." And with that, she vanished, leaving Kale clutching the stone and wondering how deep the web of secrets truly ran. The stone burned faintly in Kel's palm as they stared at it, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. It was warm to the touch, almost alive, and the symbols etched into its surface shimmered with an inner light. Kale didn't know what it meant or how it worked, but one thing was clear: the alien woman had given it to them for a reason. Whatever secrets lay hidden beneath EO7, this stone was the key to unlocking them. Kale tucked the stone into their pocket and slipped out of the colony under the cover of darkness. The guards were distracted by increased patrols near the perimeter, leaving the old tunnels unwatched. Moving quickly, Kale retraced their steps to the entrance, heart pounding with anticipation and fear. They couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that Drake and his men would soon discover what they were up to. Inside the tunnels, the air felt heavier than before, charged with an energy that made the hairs on Cal's neck stand on end. The glowing symbols along the walls seemed brighter now, responding to the presence of the stone. As Cal moved deeper into the labyrinth, the carvings began to hum softly, vibrating in sync with the rhythm of the artifact in their pocket. Finally, they reached a massive chamber unlike anything they'd seen before. The ceiling soared high above, disappearing into shadow, and the floor was covered in crystalline structures that pulsed with light. In the center of the room stood a towering obelisk, its surface covered in intricate patterns that matched the symbols on the stone. The entire space radiated power, humming with an otherworldly energy that made Kel's skin tingle. Before they could take another step, the alien woman, Nyx, appeared beside them. She looked different this time, less ethereal and more solid. Her glowing eyes softened as she regarded Kel. "You've come far," she said quietly, "but you must understand why I brought you here." Kel turned to face her, clutching the stone tightly. "Why me? Why not someone else?" "Because you listen," Nyx replied simply. "Others see only what they want to take. You see what is." She stepped closer, gesturing toward the obelisk. "This is the heart of my people's legacy, a repository of knowledge, power, and memory. Long ago, we harnessed the planet itself, bending its forces to our will. But we grew arrogant, greedy. We pushed too far, awakened something we could not control. Our civilization fell, and those of us who survived vowed to protect what remained." Kale stared at the obelisk, awestruck. "And now humans are doing the same thing, tapping into forces we don't understand." Nyx nodded gravely. "Your leaders already seek this place. If they find it, they will destroy themselves, and perhaps this world as well." Kale felt a surge of anger mixed with dread. "So what am I supposed to do?" "Stop them alone." "You are not alone," Nyx said firmly. "I will teach you how to use the stone, how to communicate with the planet. Together, we can prevent your kind from repeating our mistakes. But you must act quickly. Time is short." As Nyx began explaining the stone's purpose, Kale realized the enormity of the task ahead. This wasn't just about saving the colony. It was about bridging two worlds, finding a way for humans and aliens to coexist. For the first time, Kale understood the weight of the choice before them. Failure wasn't an option. But as they listened to Nyx's instructions, a distant sound echoed through the chamber. A low rumble, followed by the unmistakable clang of boots on metal. Someone was coming. The distant sound of boots grew louder, echoing through the chamber like a drumbeat signaling doom. Kel's heart raced as they glanced toward the tunnel entrance, half expecting armed guards to storm in at any moment. Nyx placed a calming hand on their shoulder, her touch surprisingly warm despite her alien nature. "They are close," she whispered urgently. "But there is still time. You must learn quickly." Kale nodded, forcing themselves to focus. There was no room for panic. Not now. They turned back to the obelisk, gripping the stone tightly as Nyx guided them step by step. "Place it against the surface," she instructed. "Let it connect with the energy within." Kale hesitated for only a second before pressing the stone against the obelisk. Instantly, the chamber erupted in light. The crystalline structures hummed louder, their glow intensifying until the entire space shimmered like a star-filled sky. Symbols on the obelisk flared to life, swirling and shifting as if alive. A surge of warmth spread through Cal's body, followed by an overwhelming flood of images and sensations, memories that weren't theirs. They saw flashes of Nexus people, tall and radiant beings who once thrived in harmony with EO7. They witnessed the construction of vast cities powered by the planet's core energy, marvels of technology intertwined with nature. But then came darker visions, greed overtaking wisdom, experiments spiraling out of control, the land itself rebelling against its masters. Cities crumbled, skies burned, and survivors flowed into hiding, leaving behind ruins and warnings for future generations. When the vision subsided, Cal staggered backward, breathless and disoriented. Nyx steadied them, her glowing eyes filled with both sorrow and resolve. "Now you understand," she said softly. "This power is not meant to be controlled. It is meant to be respected." Before Cal could respond, voices echoed from the tunnel. Boots clanged against the rocky floor, growing closer with every passing second. Drake and his men had found them. "Go," Nyx urged, pushing Cal toward a narrow passage, hidden behind one of the crystalline formations. "I will hold them off. Take what you've learned, and use it wisely." "I can't leave you here," Cal protested, gripping her arm. "You must," Nyx insisted, her voice firm but gentle. "This is my duty, to protect this place, even if it means sacrificing myself. Your duty is to ensure humanity does not repeat our mistakes." Reluctantly, Cal backed away, tears stinging their eyes. As they disappeared into the shadows, Nyx turned to face the approaching intruders, her form glowing brighter with each step they took. The last thing Cal saw before slipping into the passage was Nyx raising her hands, unleashing a wave of blinding light that filled the chamber. Heart pounding, Cal ran through the twisting tunnels, clutching the stone tightly. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the enormity of what they'd seen, and the responsibility now resting solely on their shoulders. They knew Drake wouldn't stop searching for the obelisk, and the colony's fragile peace hung by a thread. But Cal also knew one thing for certain: failure wasn't an option. Humanity's survival depended on finding a way to coexist with EO7. And Nyx's sacrifice would not be in vain. Cal emerged from the tunnels into the cold night air, their chest heaving and legs trembling from exhaustion. The stone in their pocket pulsed faintly, as if reminding them of the weight they now carried. Nyx's sacrifice burned fresh in their mind, her final act of defiance against Drake and his men still replayed in flashes behind their eyes. She had bought Cal time, but how much? And at what cost? The colony loomed ahead, its perimeter lights casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Cal hesitated before stepping closer, suddenly wary of returning. Who could they trust? Drake's presence in the tunnels proved he was willing to go to extreme lengths to uncover the secrets of EO7, and Cal doubted he'd stop there. If he discovered the truth about the obelisk, or worse, the stone, there would be no reasoning with him. As Cal slipped back into the settlement, they noticed an unusual commotion near the main hub. Settlers gathered in clusters, whispering anxiously while armed guards patrolled the area. Something big had happened. Mira spotted Cal and hurried over, her face pale with worry. "Where have you been?" she demanded, grabbing Cal's arm. "Drake just made an announcement. He says someone sabotaged the excavation team. 2 guards are dead, and he's accusing you." Cal's stomach dropped. "What? That's insane. I wasn't even." "I know," Mira interrupted, lowering her voice. "But people are scared. They'll believe anything right now. You need to lay low." Before Cal could respond, a loudspeaker crackled to life, broadcasting Drake's voice throughout the colony. "Attention, settlers. A dangerous individual is among us, working against the survival of this colony. Their actions have endangered us all. If you see Cal Armitage, report their location immediately." Cal froze. panic rising like bile in their throat. "He's framing me," they muttered under their breath. "He wants to silence anyone who gets in his way." Mira grabbed Cal's hand, pulling them toward a nearby storage shed. "Come on. We can hide you here until things calm down." Inside the cramped space, Cal leaned against the wall, trying to steady their breathing. "This isn't just about me," they said after a moment. "Drake knows something. He wouldn't risk sending guards into those tunnels unless he already suspects what's down there." Mira frowned. "You think he found the obelisk?" "No," Cal replied grimly. "If he had, we'd already be hearing about it. But he's close. Too close." They pulled out the stone, studying its faint glow. It was their only advantage, the key to understanding the planet and stopping Drake. But using it meant risking exposure. Every second they delayed gave Drake more time to dig deeper. "We need allies," Cal said finally. "People who can help without drawing suspicion. Someone inside his circle." Mira nodded slowly. "There's one person who might listen, even Cole. He's Drake's second in command, but he's not blind to how reckless Drake's become. If we play it right, maybe we can turn him." Cal hesitated, weighing the risks. Trusting Evan was a gamble, but they didn't have many options left. "All right," they said quietly. "Let's try. But we move carefully. One wrong step, and we're done for." As they huddled together in the dim light of the storage shed, Cal felt the enormity of the task ahead pressing down on them. Humanity's fate, and the fragile balance of EO7, rested in their hands. Failure wasn't an option, but neither was betrayal. Cal and Mira waited until the cover of darkness before making their move. The colony was eerily quiet, its usual hum of activity silenced by fear and suspicion. Armed guards patrolled the streets, their flashlights cutting through the shadows like knives. Every step Cal took felt heavier than the last, each sound amplified in the tense stillness. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Mira led them to a secluded corner of the settlement where Evan Cole often worked late into the night. As Drake's second in command, Evan had access to sensitive information, but rarely drew attention to himself. He wasn't flashy or power-hungry. Instead, he seemed more concerned with keeping the colony running smoothly. That made him unpredictable and potentially dangerous, but Cal trusted Mira's judgment. They found Evan alone in a small office filled with maps, datapads, and half-empty coffee mugs. His face lit up briefly when he saw Mira, but his expression darkened as soon as he noticed Cal. "What is he doing here?" Evan asked sharply, glancing toward the door. "Drake's men are everywhere." "We need your help," Mira said quickly, closing the door behind them. "And you need to hear us out before you decide anything." Evan crossed his arms, his gaze flicking between them. "This better be good." Cal stepped forward, clutching the glowing stone tightly in their pocket. Drake sent guards into the old tunnels. They began, keeping their voice low. "He's looking for something. An ancient structure buried beneath the surface. It's not just ruins. It's alive, connected to the planet itself. If he finds it, he'll destroy everything." Evan frowned, clearly skeptical. "That sounds far-fetched." "It's true," Cal insisted. "I've seen it, and so has she." They nodded toward Mira, who added, "We wouldn't risk coming to you if we didn't think this was serious." For a long moment, Evan didn't speak. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples. "Even if I believe you, what can I do? Drake doesn't listen to reason anymore. He's obsessed with control, with proving himself. Stopping him won't be easy." "We don't need you to stop him outright," Cal said urgently. "Just slow him down. Feed us information, create distractions, anything to buy us time while we figure out how to neutralize whatever he's planning." Evan studied them carefully, weighing their words. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But if this blows up in my face, I'm holding both of you responsible." Relief washed over Cal, though they knew the hardest part was yet to come. With Evan on their side, They returned to the storage shed to regroup. There, Kale pulled out the stone and focused on its faint glow. Nyx had taught them how to use it to communicate with the planet's energy, a fragile connection that could allow them to stabilize the obelisk and prevent Drake from exploiting it. But mastering the stone wasn't easy. Its warmth pulsed unpredictably, sometimes flaring brightly, other times dimming completely. Frustration mounted as hours passed without progress. "You're trying too hard," Mira said gently. "Maybe it's not about forcing it. Maybe you have to trust it." Kale closed their eyes, taking a deep breath. Slowly, they let go of their doubts, focusing instead on the memories Nyx had shown them, the harmony between her people and EO7, the balance they'd once achieved. The stone responded almost immediately, its light growing steady and strong. "We're ready," Kale whispered, opening their eyes. "But we'll need Evan's help to get close enough to the tunnels again." As dawn broke over the horizon, Kale felt a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't alone anymore, not entirely. Together, they might stand a chance against Drake, but one thing was certain. Failure would mean not just the end of the colony, but the destruction of an entire world. The final confrontation came sooner than Kale expected. Evan delivered the news late one night, his voice tense with urgency. "Drake's moving faster than we thought," he said, pacing in the cramped storage shed. "He's planning to activate some kind of device near the obelisk tomorrow morning. He thinks it'll unlock the planet's energy. But if you're right, it could tear everything apart." Kale clenched their fists, dread pooling in their stomach. They had no choice now. They had to act immediately. With Mira and Evan's help, they devised a risky plan to sabotage Drake's operation without causing harm to the settlers or the planet. At dawn, Kale slipped into the tunnels, guided by the steady glow of the stone. The air was thick with tension, charged like a storm about to break. Guards patrolled nearby, but Evan had managed to create enough distractions to give them a window of opportunity. Clutching the stone tightly, Kale moved deeper into the labyrinth until they reached the massive chamber housing the obelisk. Drake stood at its base, shouting orders as technicians worked frantically to set up the device. It was a crude machine, cobbled together from scavenged parts and alien artifacts, a desperate attempt to harness power beyond human comprehension. Kale watched silently from the shadows, waiting for the right moment. As the countdown began, Kale stepped forward, raising the stone high. Its light flared brilliantly, drawing everyone's attention. "Stop," Kale shouted, their voice echoing through the chamber. "You don't know what you're doing." Drake turned, his face contorted with rage. "Armitage, I should have known you'd try something stupid." He gestured to the guards, who raised their weapons. But before anyone could fire, the obelisk responded to the stone's energy. The crystalline structures hummed louder, their glow intensifying until the entire chamber shimmered with blinding light. Symbols on the obelisk swirled violently, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. "Shut it down," Drake yelled, panic creeping into his voice. But it was too late. The machine overloaded, sparks flying, as it collapsed in a heap of smoking metal. Kale focused all their energy on the stone, channeling its power to stabilize the obelisk. Memories of Nyx's teachings flooded their mind. Balance, harmony, respect. Slowly, the trembling subsided, and the light dimmed, leaving the chamber eerily calm. Drake stared in disbelief, his plans crumbling around him. "What have you done?" he snarled. "I stopped you from destroying us all," Kale replied firmly. Turning to the others, they added, "This isn't ours to take. We can live here, but only if we learn to coexist, not conquer." In the days that followed, the colony began to change. Drake's reckless leadership was exposed, forcing him to step down. Under Evan's guidance, settlers adopted new policies focused on sustainability and cooperation. Kale became an advocate for peaceful coexistence, sharing what they'd learned from Nyx and the obelisk. Though Nyx was gone, her sacrifice wasn't forgotten. As Kale gazed out at the horizon one evening, they felt a quiet sense of hope. Humanity still had much to learn, but maybe, just maybe, they were ready to listen.